A new flight instructor told Morgan Freeman to move his plane. 18 minutes later, his logbook fell open. A new flight instructor at a small Mississippi airfield ordered an elderly black man to move his Cessna out of the hangar so a paying customer could take the spot. "Sir, this isn't a museum. This is a working airport." 18 minutes later, that same instructor was sitting on the hangar steps, holding a leather logbook with 3,416 hours of flight time written inside it, and a name on the cover page he had been too proud to ask for. What was in that logbook? Who was the 19-year-old girl who screamed at the mechanic to shut the engine down? And why did a retired airfield grease monkey named Earl Brennan stand up from his coffee, walk across the tarmac, and tell the new instructor he had just insulted the man who saved every single one of their jobs in 2019? Some warnings you should listen to. Some men you should never assume you understand. There is a stretch of Mississippi between Tunica and Clarksdale, where the land flattens out the way an old man flattens his hands on the kitchen table when he is about to tell you something he has been thinking about for a long time. The cotton fields run almost to the edge of the road. The cypress trees lean into the wind. In the late afternoon of September 14th, the sun sat low and gold over the Mississippi River, painting the runway of the Tunica County Airfield in a color that looked more like honey than light. Cicadas held their long, dry song in the willows along the property line. The windsock at the north end of the field hung slack against its pole. It was the kind of quiet you only find in the Delta, where even the silence feels like it has been there longer than you have. The Tunica County Airfield was not what most people pictured when they heard the word airport. The single runway was 4,281 feet of patched asphalt, with 2 old hangars on the west side and a faded yellow Quonset hut that served as the office, the lounge, and the maintenance shop all at once. A coffee pot in the corner ran from sunup to sundown. A handwritten sign on the door read, "Pilots, sign in. If you don't know how to sign in, you ain't a pilot." The whole field had been built in 1957, and you could feel every one of those years in the way the floor sagged near the door, and the way the rivets on the hangar walls had loosened over decades of Delta heat. Earl Brennan was 73 years old, and he had worked at this airfield since he was 22. He had retired in 2021, officially, but every Tuesday and Thursday he still came in, sat at the same table in the corner of the lounge, drank the same black coffee from the same chipped mug with a faded American flag on it, and watched the planes come and go. His granddaughter May had started working part-time at the airfield 3 months earlier, cleaning the hangars and the office for $11.75 an hour while she took her first semester of aviation classes at the community college in Clarksdale. Earl had taught May everything she knew about airplanes, which was more than most 19-year-olds in Tunica County knew about anything. He had taught her how to check the oil. He had taught her how to read a pre-flight. He had taught her more than once, with his hand on her shoulder and his voice low, that you always walk a full circle around an airplane before anyone touches the start switch. Always, no exceptions. Even if you are tired, even if you are running late, even if the man telling you to hurry up is your boss. That afternoon, May was mopping the floor of Hangar 2 when she heard the first engine of the day cough to life out on the apron. She did not pay it any mind. The Cessna 72 that did flight lessons in the morning had already gone up and come down twice. The crop duster from over by Friars Point was probably finishing its run. She kept mopping. Then she heard the new voice, the one she had been hearing for 2 weeks now and had not gotten used to. Dale Whitaker was 38 years old, and he had been the chief flight instructor and assistant manager of the Tunica County Airfield for exactly 16 days. Before that, he had spent 11 years at a regional carrier out of Atlanta, where he had washed out of a captain upgrade twice and had finally taken a buyout. He had grown up in Marietta, Georgia, in a house with a circular driveway, and he had a way of saying y'all that sounded like he was correcting your pronunciation while he said it. His uniform shirt was always pressed. His shoes were always polished. He had a clipboard he carried everywhere, and he liked to tap it against his thigh when he was thinking, which was often, and which always seemed to mean that something was about to be other people's problem. Dale had decided, on his 4th day at the airfield, that the place had no standards. By his 8th day he had begun what he called, in the staff meeting, operational modernization. By his 16th day he had decided that the old Cessna 14 parked in the front of Hangar 1, the one that belonged to some old gentleman who flew in and out every other month, and paid his hangar fees in person with a check, was occupying valuable space that could be rented to a corporate client out of Memphis for $1,475 a month. He had not bothered to look at the lease. He had not bothered to talk to the airfield manager, who was on vacation in Gulf Shores. He had decided, and when Dale decided something, Dale acted. At 4:52 in the afternoon, Dale walked into Hangar 1 with Hank Pollard, the 26-year-old mechanic who had been working at Tunica for less than a year, and who did not yet know how to say no to a man who carried a clipboard. Dale pointed at the Cessna 414. The plane was a twin-engine, 8-seater, the kind of aircraft most people at this airfield only ever saw in magazines. It was painted a clean white with a single dark green stripe along the fuselage. Its registration number ended in 2 letters that everyone on the field had stopped noticing years ago. The plane was beautiful in the way that old, well-kept machines are beautiful, the kind of beautiful that has been earned, not bought. "Pull it out and move it to the tie-down on the east end," Dale said. "We need this slot cleared by tomorrow morning. Use the tractor, or just start it up and taxi it, whichever is faster." Hank hesitated. "Mr. Whitaker, that plane belongs to—" "I know who it belongs to. I read the file. Some retiree who flies in once a quarter. He doesn't get to hold our best hangar slot for the price of a Sunday dinner. Move it." Hank looked at the Cessna. He looked at Dale. He looked at the keys on the pegboard behind the door. There was a small faded tag on the key ring with a single name written on it in pencil, in handwriting Hank did not recognize. He did not look at the tag for long. He took the keys. This is the moment in the story where things could have ended very differently. Remember it. The little choices. The man who did not look at the keys. The man who did not pick up the phone. The man who decided that 16 days of experience at this airfield outweighed 68 years of history at this airfield. Some men spend their whole lives in small choices like that. Some men get away with it. May heard the hangar doors slide open on their old rollers. She heard the soft scrape of Hank's boots on the concrete. She heard a moment later Dale's voice saying, "Forget the tractor. Just fire it up, it's faster." And then she heard Hank, hesitant but obedient, climb into the cockpit. It was at that moment, mop in one hand and a damp rag over her shoulder, that May stepped out of Hangar 2 and saw for the second time that day the dog. The dog was a German shepherd, old, gray around the muzzle, with one ear that did not quite stand up the way the other one did. It had been a retired K9 from the Coahoma County Sheriff's Department, and it had wandered onto the field 2 weeks earlier, half-starved and limping. May had been feeding it scraps from her lunch every day since. She had named it Sergeant. She did not know yet, because nobody had told her yet, that Sergeant had been the dog of a deputy who had died in a car accident on Highway 61 the previous spring, and that Sergeant had been looking for him ever since. Walking from yard to yard along the Delta, Sergeant did not know much anymore. He was tired, he was old, and he liked to lie in the shade. That afternoon, Sergeant had crawled into the shade under the left engine of the Cessna 414, where it was cool, and he had fallen asleep with his head resting on his paws. May saw him from across the apron. She saw the hangar door slide all the way open. She saw Hank in the cockpit checking the panel. She saw Dale standing 6 feet from the wing, clipboard in hand, looking impatient. And she saw, in the half-second it took for her brain to put the pieces together, exactly what was about to happen. She dropped the mop. She ran. She ran the way 19-year-old girls who grew up running barefoot on Delta dirt run, which is fast, and she covered the 83 feet of apron between Hangar 2 and the Cessna in a time that would have impressed her high school track coach if her high school had still had one. She ran past the fuel truck. She ran past Dale Whitaker, who turned with his mouth half open. She ran straight to the front of the airplane, planted her hands on the metal of the propeller cowl, and shouted with everything she had at the cockpit window, "Hank, don't start it. Don't start the engine. There's a dog under there." For a long second nothing moved. May could see Hank's face through the windshield, half turned toward her, his hand still on the master switch. She could see Dale off to her right, his clipboard frozen in mid-tap. Then Dale started laughing. It was not a kind laugh. It was the laugh of a man who has just had his authority interrupted by someone he has decided does not matter. It was the laugh of a man who has been waiting all afternoon for someone to give him a reason to feel superior. He walked across the apron toward May, his polished shoes clicking on the concrete, the clipboard tapping against his thigh. "Young lady," he said, and he made the word lady sound like an insult. "Step away from the airplane. You are interfering with operations." "There's a dog under the wing," May said. She did not move. "There is no dog under the wing." "There is, Sergeant. He sleeps there. He's old. He doesn't hear good. If you start that engine, the prop is going to." "You know what I think?" Dale said, and he was smiling now, the kind of smile that has nothing to do with being happy. "I think you should get back to your mop. I think this is pilot business. I think a small-town girl with a community college schedule does not get to interrupt a flight operation because she has named a stray dog. Go on. Move." Behind him, in the office doorway, Earl Brennan had stood up from his coffee. There were 6 other people on the airfield apron in that moment. There was Hank, in the cockpit, frozen. There was a young woman named Bethany Lott, who had come in for her 3rd flight lesson, and was sitting in a folding chair outside the office reading a textbook. There was an older mechanic named Curtis Heaton, who had been changing a tire on the airfield's pickup truck and had stopped to watch. There was a pilot named Reggie Fennell, who had just landed his Bonanza and was walking up to the office with his flight bag. There was Earl, and there was, though nobody had looked over yet, an elderly gentleman standing in the open passenger door of the Cessna 414, on the far side from where Dale and May were arguing, with one hand on the door frame and the other on his white-trimmed beard, watching the whole thing very calmly. He had been in the cabin checking his charts. He had heard the hangar doors. He had heard Hank get into the pilot's seat. He had heard May yell. He had heard Dale laugh. He had stepped out of the plane without anyone noticing, the way he stepped into most rooms, slowly, with that quiet authority that did not ask for attention and therefore got it. He was wearing a faded denim shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, khaki pants that had a small patch of grease on the right knee, and brown leather boots that had seen more miles than most cars. A small gold earring caught the late afternoon light in his left ear. His white hair was cut short. His beard was trimmed. His face was the face of a man who had spent a great deal of his life in the sun and a great deal more of it in thought. His eyes, very dark, very steady, looked at Dale Whitaker for a long, slow second and then looked down at the apron in front of the left engine. May had not moved her hands from the propeller cowl. Her chest was rising and falling fast. "Move," Dale said again, louder this time, in case anyone on the field had missed the first round. "I will not say it a third time. I will have you removed from this property." It was at that point that the elderly gentleman in the denim shirt cleared his throat. It was a small sound, barely a sound at all, but every person on that apron turned to look at him. "Young man," he said, and the voice was low and slow and unhurried, the kind of voice that did not need to be raised because it had never in 70-some years needed to be raised. "I wonder if you might do me a small favor. Before you ask anyone to move anywhere, I wonder if you might just take a look under that wing. It will only take you a moment." Dale stared at him. He had not until this second registered that the old man existed. "And you are?" The old man smiled. It was a small smile. It did not reach his eyes. "I am a man who has a habit of walking around his airplane before anyone starts it. It is a habit I have kept for a long time. I would consider it a kindness if you would humor me. Sir, are you the owner of this aircraft? Then you should know that this hangar slot has been reassigned. Effective tomorrow morning, we are moving your plane to the East End tie-down, and I would like to begin that process now, without further interference. Young man," and here the old man took one step forward, just one, off the cabin step and onto the apron. He moved slowly. He moved with the kind of carefulness that comes from knowing exactly what your body can and cannot do. "I am not interfering. I am asking you to look under the wing. There is no dog under the wing. Then it will cost you nothing to look." The whole apron was silent now. Cicadas, wind through the hangar, nothing else. Dale Whitaker stood with his clipboard against his thigh and his face going slowly red in front of 7 witnesses and an old man he did not recognize, and he made his choice. "I do not have time for this," he said. "Hank, start the engine." In the cockpit, Hank looked through the windshield. He looked at May. He looked at the old man. He did not move his hand toward the master switch. He looked back at Dale. His mouth opened. "Sir," he said, "I'm going to get out and look." Dale's jaw tightened. "Hank, I gave you a direct instruction. And I'm going to get out and look, Mr. Whitaker. It'll take me 10 seconds. Hank climbed out of the cockpit. He walked around the nose of the airplane. He knelt down with one hand on the leading edge of the wing for balance, and he looked under the left engine. He stayed down there for a long time, longer than 10 seconds. When he came up, his face was the color of old paper. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, and his voice was very quiet, "there's a dog. There's an old German shepherd asleep right under the prop arc." Curtis Heaton, the mechanic by the pickup truck, took his cap off and held it in his hand. Earl Brennan in the office doorway did not move. The old man on the apron closed his eyes for 1 second, just one. When he opened them again, he was looking at Dale. "There," he said softly, "now you know. That should have been the end of it. In a different story, with a different man, that would have been the end of it. A bad call would have been caught, a life would have been saved, an apology would have been offered. The afternoon would have gone on. But Dale Whitaker did not become Dale Whitaker by apologizing. "That dog is not supposed to be on this property," he said. His voice was thinner now, tighter. "That is a safety hazard. Whose dog is that?" "Mine," May said quickly. "You brought a stray dog onto the operational area of this airfield. He's not a stray, he used to be. You will be terminated for this, effective immediately." There was a sound from the office doorway. It was the sound of an old man setting down a chipped coffee mug on a metal table. It was the sound of Earl Brennan deciding he had heard enough. Earl Brennan walked across the apron the way a man walks who has worked on this ground for 51 years. He walked past the fuel truck. He walked past Curtis Heaton, who took a step back to let him by. He walked up to Dale Whitaker, and he stopped about 4 feet away, and he looked at him with the kind of look that does not require words. But Earl had words anyway. Earl had a great many words. "Mr. Whitaker," Earl said. His voice was rough as a gravel road. "I'm going to ask you one question, and I want you to think real hard before you answer it. Do you know who that man is?" He pointed at the old gentleman in the denim shirt. Dale looked at the old man. He looked back at Earl. His face was doing something complicated. "He is the owner of the aircraft," Dale said. "And I have already." "Do you know who he is?" "I do not know what you are." "Mr. Whitaker," Earl said, slow and patient now, the way a teacher talks to a student who has not been paying attention. "That is Morgan Freeman." The apron went very quiet. Bethany Lott looked up from her textbook for the first time. Curtis Heaton put his cap back on his head and then took it off again. Reggie Fennell, the Bonanza pilot, set his flight bag down on the concrete. Hank, still standing by the left engine of the Cessna, leaned slowly against the wing as if his legs had stopped knowing what to do. May did not move her hands from the propeller cowl. Dale Whitaker, 16 days into his new job, looked at the old man in the denim shirt with the patch of grease on his knee. And the thing his face did was not a thing you can describe in one word. It was several things, happening at once and none of them good. Recognition came first, then disbelief. Then the slow understanding that the laugh he had laughed 2 minutes ago was a laugh that was going to follow him for a long time. "That's not," he started. "It is," Earl said. The old man on the apron, who all this time had been standing quietly with one hand still on his beard, gave a small nod. Just an acknowledgement. He did not introduce himself. He did not offer a hand. He simply said very quietly, "I would still like you to deal with the dog before anyone starts an engine, please. He is old and he is tired and he has had a hard year." He walked over to the wing. He knelt down slowly the way a man of 88 kneels down when he has not lost his pride about it. He looked at Sargent. He reached out one long dark hand and laid it on the dog's flank. Sargent opened one eye. The eye looked at Morgan Freeman the way old dogs look at people who are not in a hurry. Morgan smiled. "Come on, old man," he said softly. "Let's get you out of there." And he eased the dog out from under the wing, one hand on the collar May had made from an old leather belt, the other hand under the dog's ribs, and he walked Sargent slowly across the apron to the shade of the Quonset hut and settled him down there. The whole thing took about 90 seconds. Nobody spoke for any of those 90 seconds. Nobody on that apron could have spoken if their life depended on it. When Morgan came back, his hands were dusty and his knees were dustier, and he looked at Dale Whitaker the way you look at a man you have decided not to be angry with. "Now," he said, "about my airplane." Dale opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. "Mr. Freeman, I had no idea. I would never have, sir, the lease. Of course the lease stands. I will reverse the reassignment immediately. Let me make some calls. Let me, sir. There has been a misunderstanding." "There has not been a misunderstanding," Morgan said gently. "There has been a decision. You made it. I am not angry about it. I want you to understand that. I am not angry. I do think, however, that you owe an apology to that young lady. And to Hank. And to your mechanic over there with his cap in his hand. And to anyone else on this field whose word you didn't believe today, because you had already decided whose word counted." Dale turned to May. The whole apron watched. May was still standing with her hands on the cowl of the airplane. There were tears running down her face, though she had not noticed them yet. She had not let go of the metal because her legs were still figuring out how to hold her up. "Miss," Dale said, his throat was working. I am sorry, I should not have." "Don't apologize to me," May said quietly. "Apologize to Sargent." A breath went out of the entire apron at once. Earl Brennan turned around and walked back to the office without another word. He sat down at his table. He picked up his coffee. He stared at the wall for a long time. The story could have ended there, too. A different story would have ended there. But there was one more piece. There was always one more piece. About 15 minutes later, after Hank had pushed the Cessna 414 back into hangar, one by hand with Reggie Fennell helping him, after Bethany Lott had quietly gone back to her textbook with her hand shaking, after Curtis Heaton had finished the tire on the pickup truck because there was nothing else to do with his hands, Morgan Freeman walked over to the office and stepped inside. He poured himself a cup of black coffee from the pot in the corner. He sat down at the table next to Earl Brennan. He did not speak for a few minutes. The two old men sat there in the slanting light from the office window, and they looked, to anyone watching from the apron, like a photograph from another time. Then Morgan said, "Earl, you didn't have to do that." Earl said, "I know." Morgan said, "I had it handled." Earl said, "I know you did." Morgan said, "Then why?" Earl set his coffee down. Because that boy out there has been running this field into the ground for 2 weeks. And because my granddaughter has been crying herself to sleep 3 nights running because of the way he talks to her. And because I figured if he was going to insult somebody today, it might as well be somebody who had the patience to teach him a lesson instead of fire him on the spot. Which, for the record, I would not have had the patience to do. Morgan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "She is a good girl, your May." "She is. She walked all the way around that airplane before anyone touched a switch. I saw her do it twice today. I have been flying for 23 years. I have not always seen that from people half her age. I taught her that." "You taught me that, Morgan, about 50 years ago, when I was 22 and you were a young man with a beard and not much else." Morgan smiled. "I was not a pilot then." "No, but you were a man who walked around things before he started them, I noticed." They sat with that for a while. Outside on the apron, Dale Whitaker was sitting on the hangar steps. He had taken off his uniform shirt. He was holding a leather logbook in his lap. The logbook had been on the dashboard of the Cessna 414, and Hank had handed it to him without saying anything, just placed it in his hands and walked away. Dale had opened it. On the inside cover, in a careful, slightly old-fashioned handwriting, was a name. Below the name was a private pilot certificate number. Below that was an instrument rating endorsement dated 2003. Below that were 3,416 hours of flight time, written page by page in ink, in the handwriting of a man who had been keeping his own records, by hand for 2 decades and 3 years. There was a Cessna 414 type endorsement. There was a multi-engine endorsement. There was a Zerfra examiner in Memphis dated 4 months earlier, with the words "excellent airmanship, recommend continuation," written underneath in someone else's pen. Dale read every page. He read all the way to the last entry dated that morning. "Inbound from Charleston, Mississippi. 3 souls on board, smooth flight, clear sky." Then he closed the logbook. He laid it down on the step beside him. He put his head in his hands. About 420 feet away, in the office, Morgan Freeman finished his coffee. He stood up. He nodded to Earl. He walked out onto the apron. He walked over to the hangar steps, and he sat down next to Dale Whitaker, slowly, with one hand on the railing. Dale did not look up. He could not look up. "Sir," Dale said. His voice was a wreck. "I want to resign, effective immediately." "I do not want you to resign." "Sir, what I did out there, what I said to that young lady, I do not deserve." "Son." Morgan said the word softly. He said it the way a man says it who knows what the word means. "I am going to tell you something, and I am going to ask you to listen. I am not going to be angry with you. I am not going to teach you a lesson. I am, however, going to tell you something my grandmother told me a very long time ago, when I was about the age of that young man in the cockpit, sitting in a kitchen in Charleston, Mississippi. She told me that every person who walks past you in a day is carrying a story you don't know yet. Some of them are stories worth listening to. All of them are stories worth respecting. That includes a girl with a mop. That includes a stray dog under a wing. That includes an old man you have never met before in a denim shirt with grease on his knee. She told me that, and I have been carrying it with me for the better part of 80 years. I am going to suggest you start carrying it too." Dale tried to speak. He could not. "I am not going to fire you. I do not own this airfield. I am, however, going to ask you a question, and I am going to ask you to think before you answer it. The question is this. Do you want to be the kind of man who learns this lesson once today, sitting on these steps, in front of an old fool from down the road? Or do you want to be the kind of man who has to learn it again, and again and again, every time life gives him a chance, until one day there is no chance left?" The sun was going down. The Mississippi sky had turned the color of an old peach. Cicadas were starting up again in the willows. "I want to learn it now," Dale said. "Good," Morgan said. "Good." He stood up. He put one hand briefly on Dale's shoulder. He left it there for 2 seconds. He took it away. "There is one more thing," Morgan said. "That 19-year-old girl walked around my airplane before anyone touched a switch. She has good instincts. She has a good teacher. I would like, when you put together next month's schedule, to see her enrolled in your ground school. I will pay her tuition. You will not mention to her that I am paying. You will simply tell her she has been awarded a scholarship from the Tallahatchie River Foundation, which happens to be true. Are we agreed?" "Yes, sir." "And Dale, you will, before you go home tonight, find out where Sergeant lives. He does not live anywhere. He has been looking for someone who is not coming back. You will, between you and Hank and Curtis, figure out who at this field is going to take that dog home. I do not care which one of you it is, but that dog sleeps under a roof tonight. Are we agreed?" "Yes, sir." "Good." Morgan looked out at the runway. The windsock was just beginning to lift in the evening breeze. "I am going to fly out in the morning. I will be back next month. I want to see you still here, son." I want to see May in your ground school. I want to see Sergeant on someone's porch, you hear me? Yes, sir. Morgan walked back across the apron toward Hangar 1, slowly, with that careful, dignified walk of his. He did not look back, he did not need to. In the weeks that followed, certain things happened at the Tunica County Airfield that nobody who was on the apron that afternoon ever quite forgot. The airfield manager came back from Gulf Shores and was briefed, quietly, by Earl Brennan. He decided not to fire Dale Whitaker. He decided instead to require Dale to spend 2 hours every Saturday morning at Earl's table, drinking coffee and listening. Dale did not miss a Saturday for the next 11 months. May Brennan enrolled in ground school on October 6th. Her tuition, $2,485, was paid by the Tallahatchie River Foundation. She earned her private pilot certificate at the age of 21. Her instructor on her check ride was a man named Dale Whitaker, who the morning of her ride had a hand that shook slightly when he signed her sign-off, and who, when she landed, walked out to the runway and shook her hand without saying a single word about the day they had first met. He did not need to. She knew. He knew she knew. Sergeant went home with Hank Pollard. He slept on a braided rug at the foot of Hank's bed for the next 2.5 years, and he died one Sunday morning in March, peacefully, with his head on Hank's hand. Hank buried him under the magnolia tree behind the airfield office. Earl carved the marker by hand. It read in careful letters, "Sergeant, a good dog, saved by a girl with a mop." The Cessna 414 stayed in Hangar 1. Its owner flew in every other month. He always paid his hangar fees in person. He always signed the logbook before he taxied. He always walked around the airplane twice before anyone touched a switch. On a Tuesday afternoon in the following June, about 9 months after that September day, Morgan Freeman was sitting on the porch of his ranch in Charleston, Mississippi, watching the sun go down over the rows of beehives along the south fence. His youngest grandchild was sitting beside him. She was 22 years old. She was asking him about the day she had heard about, the day at the airfield, because she had heard the story now from 3 different people, and she wanted to hear it from him. "What did you learn, grandfather?" she asked. Morgan took a long time to answer. "I learned," he said finally, "that I was almost the kind of man who would have started his airplane that day without walking around it first, because I was tired, because I trusted the people I was paying, because I am 88 years old and I have flown 23 years without a serious incident, and a man can get comfortable. A man can stop checking, and a man can lose more in one afternoon than he gained in 40 years. But you did walk around it." "I did not. A 19-year-old girl with a mop walked around it for me. She is the reason that dog lived. She is the reason I lived with myself afterwards. She is the reason a young man named Dale Whitaker is, today, a better instructor than he was a year ago. I did not save anybody that day, child. A girl with a mop did. I just had the good sense for 1 minute to listen to her." He looked out at the beehives. The sun touched the tops of the cypress trees along the river. "That's the lesson," he said softly. "Listen to the people you are not paying attention to. They are usually the ones telling you the truth. There is a town in the Mississippi Delta. It sits along the highway between Memphis and Jackson, the way many towns in that part of the country sit. Quiet, full of history, holding more stories than the people who pass through it ever know. There is an airfield outside of that town. There is a hangar at that airfield. There is a Cessna 414 in that hangar, and a logbook on the dashboard, and a name on the inside cover of that logbook that for the rest of his life a man named Dale Whitaker has carried with him every time he has been tempted to laugh at someone he has decided does not matter. Some warnings you should listen to. Some warnings come from a 19-year-old girl with a mop in her hand and a dog she has named, and you do not know in that moment that she is the most important person on the airfield. You think you know. You always think you know. And that is exactly why, every once in a while, the Mississippi sky has to teach you otherwise. That is how Mississippi works. That is how time works. That is how a man learns to walk around his airplane before anyone starts the engine. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. There is somebody in your life right now who is being talked over, or talked past, or talked down to, and they may be the one telling you the truth. Listen to them. Watch the whole story to the end if you have not already, and if it moved you, leave a comment with what you took from it. We read every one. Subscribe for more stories about the quiet wisdom of the people we almost never notice, and the lessons we are almost too proud to learn. Disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction created with the assistance of AI for the purpose of sharing positive messages and life lessons. It is inspired by Morgan Freeman's well-known reputation for wisdom, his real love of the Mississippi Delta, his beekeeping passion, his pilot's license, and his deep commitment to his southern community. The events, characters, other than Morgan Freeman himself, Locations and dialogue depicted are entirely fictional and not intended to represent or target any real individual, business, or organization. Any resemblance to actual events or persons other than Morgan Freeman is purely coincidental. No AI voice cloning or deepfake technology has been used to impersonate Morgan Freeman.